Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning study, and we're going to continue looking at Jonathan and his armor bearer and see what things we can find. But before we do, let's open with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we invite your presence once again as we continue to receive light from your word. We ask, Lord, that your Holy Spirit can fill our hearts and minds, that we can see that light can shine into this darkness of these hearts and minds, and that we can see our need of you and your remedy for sin. We pray that you can be with each person, that you can bless them, and that as we study together, that your Holy Spirit will unite us, and that we can see the light that you have for us today. We thank you for the time that we live in as we come to the close of this world's history. We're thankful, Lord, for the privileges and for the trials and difficulties. Be with us now, we pray and ask. Jesus. Well, good morning again. I don't know how much time people have to think about what we have been studying, but it is pretty interesting, these applications that we're seeing for our history. And one of the things we were reading about yesterday was we have, after Saul, we're going to have King David. Now, we haven't got there yet, but I was thinking about it. So David would represent the next leadership, right? But what does David represent? Are we looking for like somebody like Jeff? To David going to represent Jeff, or what would David represent? Dwight?
Probably message.
Okay. I didn't catch what anybody said.
The church triumphant.
Okay. And Jeff, what did you say?
Well, I said the message.
What about just Christ?
Yeah.
The Son of David.
What, Stephen?
The Son of David.
Well, I know he's the son of David. Yeah. But, a man after his own heart, right? So we have, with Saul, we have someone that is, chosen by God, but he has these flaws. And of course, David has flaws too. But what he represents as far as in these lines, and I've made this argument before, that the leadership that we are to have is not some new organization with some person who's having, like as Jeff was doing when he passed the leadership on to Parminder, just some other person representing Elijah, Elisha, John the Baptist, Christ, having a person representing. My view is that in the final end of time, God takes the work into his own hands, so that David would represent Christ doing it. That's the way that I would understand. Now, we're going to have to deal also with Solomon, what that represents. We know that has to do with rebuilding of the temple. That's one of the main things that Solomon does. And so then when we have here Jonathan and Saul, one thing that we see that Jonathan is he is not the next leader of the movement, correct? Jonathan never becomes the king.
Correct.
And, because there always is this tendency in human nature, we see it all the time. God gives light to someone, and that person then believes they're the source of light. And, the one thing that we can clearly understand is that God has given us light. This doesn't put us in some special place of authority. We're not in competition in that sense, which often we see happening. And when we look at what Jeff is doing presently, and again, it's not something, we're not trying to tear down Jeff. We just recognize that in this parallel, Jeff is acting like Saul, after the kingdom is taken from him. He still remains, in a sense, to be king from some people's perspective, but in reality, the message the light is not coming from him. And now we have Jonathan. We're saying that Jonathan represents an aspect of this message connected primarily with the chronology, July 18th, and we can see the connection with me as a person in this. So, we can accept that there is this this connection, but Jonathan never becomes the head of a movement, right? Now he's going to be connected with David, right? And if David represents Christ, then we can see that parallel as well. Okay. Now there's going to be some other things as we get into these stories that we're going to have to sort through regarding David and Jonathan and Saul, and see how they fit events that have happened in the movement. And we haven't looked at them yet. But when we're looking at this situation with Jonathan and his armor bearer, we're placing this as dealing with December 6th, 2020. That's where we have come to. We can see that there was these crags that he has to pass between, these teeth. So, and we had spent a bit of time looking at that. So we know that there's going to be one northward and one southward, and I added the Hebrew numbers northward and southward. And initially I was just looking at my chart wrong, but it goes from November 22nd, 1963 to December 6, 2020. That is the period intervening between those two dates. And then originally I thought it was, February 6th, because I had a chart of all these different dates, right? When I looked at it, I just looked at the wrong starting date. It was actually 259 days, I think 289 days from my birthday to November. Yeah, 289. And then, so the number was, where is it here? Just took that date out for some reason. Yeah, so that was, 20,833 days between those two dates. And then we talked a little bit about the death. We know JFK died on that day. And there was these parallels or coincidences between JFK and Abraham Lincoln. And so I wanted to go through those. Now, some of these, well, they call it an urban legend. So I'm not really sure, it's like people don't take any credence to any of this. So you have some coincidences. Both presidents were shot in the back of the head on the Friday before a major holiday while seated beside their wives, neither of whom were injured. Well, I don't know if that's a great parallel, but both assassinations were loud and insistent claims that the fatal shot must have come from a different direction. Each president in his 30s married a socially prominent 24-year-old girl who spoke French fluently. You didn't know that. I don't know if all these are correct even. While in the White House, each president had a family of 3 children and both lost a child through death. Both Lincoln and Kennedy were second children. Both had been boat captains. Both were related to a U.S. senator, attorney general, ambassador to Great Britain, and the mayor of Boston. Each had been elected to Congress in the year 47 and were vice presidential runners-up in the year 56. Each was elected president in 60, so 1860 and 1960. Before each was elected, a sister died. Both had a friend named Billy Graham and knew Adlai Stevenson. These are pretty obscure parallels. President Kennedy had a secretary named Mrs. Lincoln, and President Lincoln had a secretary named John Kennedy. The names Lincoln and Kennedy each contain 7 letters. That's a pretty strange, that's not that big of a parallel. Both were succeeded by vice presidents named Johnson, Andrew born in 1808 and Lyndon in 1908, both of whom had 13 letters in their names and 2 daughters. Both assassins had 15 letters in their names. Both shot Lincoln in a theater and fled to a warehouse. Oswald shot Kennedy from a warehouse and fled to a theater. Both assassins were in their turn assassinated by shooters who used a Colt revolver and fired only one fatal shot. There's many more coincidences. I've seen a lot of other ones. So some people say the list is only partly accurate. Time magazine calls it a compendium. What's that?
Historically, I would love to find Lincoln's secretary named Kennedy, because Abraham Lincoln employed 2 private secretaries, John George Nicolai and John Milton Hay, and that is documented.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I'm just reading this list here. I haven't checked them out, and there are some suggestions that these lists have some, mistakes in them, right? So, yeah. So here's another one where they have. So here's the one that I'm more familiar with. This one's hard to read. Of course, we have the 1960 thing. Yeah. So here, Booth shot Lincoln in a theater and ran to a warehouse, and Lee Harvey Oswald shot Kennedy from a warehouse and ran to a theater. Yeah. So I've seen different lists. The question is there a parallel? Do we see, is that sufficient to sort of connect us to the symbols of the Civil War, right? No, obviously they're not in a time of a civil war, right? There's lots of things that are different. Now, I focused more on the fact that we got Aldous Huxley, C.S. Lewis, and Kennedy all killed on the same day.
That they died on the same day.
They died on the same day, not killed, but died on the same day. They died on the same day that Kennedy was killed, right? So, and of course, that date, November 22nd, has its significance in it's connected to 977 BC. So that 15th. What's that, William?
I said they all died in separate years, right?
Same year. They all died in the same day, the same year.
I don't think.
Aldous Huxley, JFK, and C.S. Lewis all die on November 22nd, 1963.
Elvis Presley didn't die in 63.
I said anything about Presley. Aldous Huxley.
That's my fault. I thought you said Presley, Elvis Presley. I'm sorry.
Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley wrote A Brave New World, which is a dystopian depiction of what the world's going to be like sometime in the future. It differs from George Orwell's 1984 in that people are controlled by pleasure rather than, force and fear.
My fault, Theodore. I thought you said Presley. I apologize.
You've already said that. So we have, to me, there's a significance. I've always seen a significance in that those 3 died on that day. The fact that we can take northward and southward and count from that date to December 6th, 2020, the question is, do we have a connection between what happens there and what's happening in our movement, right? So this is obviously, we have a world event, the death of 3 significant individuals on the same day. One of those individuals we tie to coincidences with Abraham Lincoln, so there's some parallels there. And so is this just a bunch of coincidences that really have no significance, or can we tie that symbolically to Jonathan and his armor bearer passing between these sharp rocks one on the north side and one on the south. One's over on the south and one's on the north, right? So northward and southward. And taking these Hebrew numbers and saying, well, it's the number of days between those events. So the question is, can we take November 22nd, 1963, and say that there's some symbolism there that can tie to December 6th, 2020? So any thoughts on that? Because sure, we can tie the dates together, but what would it be symbolizing? Now we know that December 6, 2020 has the symbol of a 2520. We have the death of a president of the United States. Yeah, and so since I was 289 days old, Aran just notes that 289 is the square of 17.
17 is also the seventh prime.
Yeah, it's the seventh prime. Yeah, and I turned 17 187 days before I was converted on August 11th, 1980. So 17 also is in the story of Joseph. But so these are probably significant little structural details. But if we look at what FFA is doing on December 6, 2020, we're tying this to this story. That is, it's something that's being done independent of Saul, right? Jonathan is not telling his father about his actions, right? And we figure that that's significant in that the first attack against the Philistine garrison with the 1,000 men is under Saul's, direction. But here, this would be something separate. So we're saying that it deals with December 6, 2020. It's during a time when Saul is tarrying in the uttermost part of Gibeah under a pomegranate tree, which is in Migron, right? He has 600 men with him, right? He also Ahiah, who appears to be like the priest, unless they're saying Eli was the Lord's priest in Shiloh, but it appears that that's Ahiah, and still not 100% certain because sometimes I'd have to. So some people say it is better to refer to these words to Eli and not Ahijah or Ahiah, to whom the next words wearing an ephod apply. So I'd thought about that idea. I'm just going to see, right? So some people are saying, well, this would actually be referring to Eli. So Eli's the one that wears the ephod. And initially, when I looked at this, I was thinking, oh, it's referring to Ahiah. But we know that it could be referring to Eli, who's the one that was wearing the ephod. So the significance of Ahiah being with him would be different if Ahiah was being a priest or if he's not a priest. I mean, he's obviously of the priestly line. So the question, and I haven't seen anything in the spirit of prophecy about Ahiah or Ahijah, that he is a priest here, that this would refer to him. So it's something we have to look into. So if it's saying that Ahiah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, wearing an ephod, then that's just referring to Eli being the Lord's priest wearing an ephod. But the question is, why is this here? And why this genealogy, so to speak? And we know Ichabod, the glory is departed, right? But he's the son of Ahitub. Ahitub is just one of the brothers of Ichabod. So they're going to mention Ichabod as well. So there must be some reason. So, we'll think about that, right? And then we have, of course, between the passages. Now that between 996 is, what did I do there? So, no, here it is. 996 in the midst, from between, right? So that one doesn't particularly mean the middle. Yeah. So and Aran just put a note there dealing with so can you explain that, Aran?
Well, just another. I was trying to remember because I was looking at that date before, like a couple years ago,
Okay.
and so I can't remember if this was part of it. It could have been, but if you take the prime of 777 and take that prime, it gives you that number of days. So 7 times 7 times 7, which would be
So
343.
okay, still don't follow what you're saying. So the prime of 7, so that's the 777th prime? That doesn't make
No,
sense.
no, it's the prime of 343, which gives you 2309, and then you take the 2309th prime, which is 20,441.
Okay. And that's pretty interesting because we already know from my birth to November 9th, 2019, that King of the North and the King of the South, if you take those Hebrew Strong's numbers and you add them together, they come to the number of days intervening between my birthday and November 9th, 2019. Right. So it's just another way of tying these together. They're part of a structure. And we might draw that out at some point. I'm still trying to figure out the connection. Why November 22nd, 1963? Now, we could just say it's a symbolic date, November 22nd, going to, the 15th day of the 8th month in 977 BC, that's November 22nd. It's also the Thanksgiving Day prediction in 2018. And so that there is this connection in that Thanksgiving study, we're connecting those histories together. The history of the division of the North and the South, right, for Israel, right, God's kingdom of Israel being divided into North and South happens in 977. And we don't know exactly the date that occurs, but we do know on November 22nd in 977, that's when Jeroboam offers on the altar in Bethel, right? So, and that being a symbol of the midnight cry, the 15th day of the 8th month. And then we use that in the Thanksgiving Day prediction, that the whole structure going from that history to the Civil War that's going to happen in 742, all of that, it's all going to fit together into this structure that deals with the November 22nd Thanksgiving Day prediction. Right? So we have the North and the South, the King of the North and the King of the South, northward and southward. We have the fact that Israel's divided into the North and the South, and there's this civil war between the North and the South in Israel, and a civil war between the North and the South in the United States in the 1860s. Now, when we deal with JFK, we don't have a civil war between the North and the South in the United States, right? So we have to ask, well, why are we being brought to JFK? The death of JFK, C.S. Lewis, and Aldous Huxley. Is there some reason these three distinct figures all died on the same day? And this link to my birthday in 1963. And, the connection between November 9th, 1963 or 2019 and November 22nd, 1963, as Iran has pointed out. Are these just a bunch of coincidences? But if they're not coincidences, what are they symbolizing? And we have there tied in December 6, 2020. So we're saying that this history is addressing the history of Jonathan and his armor bearer, are representing an attack against the Philistines that's independent of the leadership of FFA, right? So I'm mixing, of course, the symbolism there, right? So he's attacking the Philistines. Saul he's not telling his father. And then we're going to have the rash, whatever they call it here, the rash vow, Saul's rash vow. And this isn't the first rash vow we've run into, right? We ran into one in the story of the judges. And then this one is also going to have the honey connected with it, the eating of the honey, and his eyes being enlightened. So we believe it has to do, that the rash vow itself is the December 6, 2020 declaration. But we have this story is sort of, it's involved. There's lots of symbols in here. Jonathan and his armor bearer first. So that would be the history, prior to specifically the rash vow. But we know that rash vow, even though it's a rash vow, there's a groundwork that's been laid in order for them to make that declaration on December 6, 2020. That is, they're going to have, first, Jeff is going to give Bronwyn and whoever, I guess they decide, authority to examine the failure of July 18, 2020 prediction. So Jeff, even though he doesn't have the authority to do so, he's going to give them some authority to do that. So they become the leadership, when in reality, it would have been better just to step aside completely. If you're going to step aside, to recognize that not only are you unfit to lead, but you're unfit to pass that leadership to anyone. That is, you're not qualified to do so. So there's still lots we have to sort out. The main question I'm focusing on, nobody's given me any ideas of how we connect this, other than these sort of connections in structure and dates, but just the event itself, JFK being assassinated, and this connected with the northward and the southward. So this passage, does it have to do with the fact that this is representing a chiasm or a structure that connects? So even though JFK itself, there may not be lots of symbolism in JFK, other than he's being a president that's assassinated, like Abraham Lincoln was, and that brings us to Abraham Lincoln's history. And that history was connected with making a prediction regarding November 22nd, 2018. Now, so 55 years later, I'm going to make a prediction about an event 55 years after Lincoln's assassination. That's going to be connected to the Civil War in 1863.
Okay, no. You said 55 years after Lincoln's assassination?
Not Lincoln's, after JFK's assassination.
Kennedy's. Thank you.
On November 22nd.
I mean, if you were doing that 55 years after Lincoln's assassination, you look pretty good for your age.
Yes. Okay. So 55 years after 1963. So it'd be 155 years, but not to the day. Which year is he assassinated? He's assassinated in
1865.
65, right? So he's not assassinated in 1863.
So that'd be 153 years.
Yeah, it's 153.
Which gives you the digits for 351.
Yeah, and also 153 itself as a symbol. Okay.
Right.
Okay, and so they're assassinated 98 years apart, but not to the day, just to the year. So, but anyway, it just ties us to the events of the Civil War, but the significance is not in JFK's assassination itself, just in the symbols that it affords us in understanding what is being, I don't know, Angela. She asked a strange question. I don't think I would make that connection. But anyway, so it's just a symbol, right? But we don't have any symbol that I can think of that would say, oh, what happened to JFK is some direct symbol to what happened on December 6, 2020, as far as to us. Like, nobody's being assassinated or anything like that. But it ties us to these symbols that are part of the reason that I'm going to be persona non grata as far as FFA is concerned, right? So Dwight, one of the main concerns that they had was the November 22nd Thanksgiving Day prediction, right?
Right.
And when you were there for that, the meetings they had prior to December 6th, so I don't remember the, but that's going to be part of really their concern. So they already, even before they had done all the examination, they already had decided that I was a problem because of that Thanksgiving Day prediction, 2 years earlier, right? That's sort of the way that I understood that you.
Yeah, they really didn't like your presentation on the Thanksgiving prediction at all.
Yeah, even though Jeff did like it, and Stephen was there. Stephen can testify that Jeff endorsed it. He didn't think there was a problem with it, right, Stephen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe he changed his mind later on, but at the time he definitely he saw that it was consistent with what we were doing. But it's going to be one of the things that they're going to use as a way of blocking me, right? So just basically shutting me out. So nobody's really going to communicate with me after that. After December 6, 2020, that's it. They just cut off all communication. So I think we can at least tie it in that sense, that it's that November 22nd date in 1963. Now, when we deal with the North and the South, then that just becomes a symbol about the Civil War between the North and the South in that history, right? And that division of the Kingdom of Israel as North and South, which in our history becomes part of a symbolism that initially Jeff is going to say has to do with Russia and the United States, but we see it much more as a civil war in the United States between the Republicans and the Democrats, right? So it's not something that Jeff really understood. We didn't understand prior to July 18th. So, part of the problem here is we have all of these different threads. This is quite a tapestry of symbols and connections, right? This is not just some simple little pattern. And one of the things that I've noted in the time that I spent studying chronology is that, and I've said this before, but when I've looked at the Protestant application of prophetic periods, connecting ancient Israel with literal Israel, applying the 25-20 years in various places, or different spans of time, or different periods of 1260, or whatever people are going to do. People usually have a very simple, or even almost say simplistic, pattern that they have found. So there are some coincidences or whatever that they find in some date, but there isn't an overall or an overarching structure, and there isn't these multiple connections that we see when we start to examine our history. They just don't have the same sort of weight, the same kind of design, because the simpler something is, the more likely it is to just occur randomly, right? The more complex something is, like life itself, for it to have occurred randomly, that wouldn't happen, right? We know that Charles Darwin, he said, if we find that the cell, or that simple life forms are too complex to have just formed naturally, well then, the whole theory falls apart, right? Of evolution, because we have to believe that life came about, just by chance, and it would have to be pretty simple to do so. We now know, of course, that no life that self-replicating life could exist by chance, because it's what we call simple life forms are astronomically complex. They just couldn't have occurred by chance. And so when we look at all these connections, somebody, can get a bit overwhelmed, all of these different dates and spans of time and symbols and numbers, and just say, well, that's really, really complex. And that's one of the arguments that has actually been made against what we're doing within the movement, is it's too complicated, right? But the reality is the fact that it is rather involved, that it's not simplistic, is a witness of its truthfulness, not of it being error. It's not like I created something complex for people to have to accept, right? The reality is that it is complex. What God's word can be understood in its simple ways, but it doesn't mean that there are not things that are extremely involved in God's word that take a lot of wisdom to understand. So Stephen did something interesting. He says, if you add the days of the three who died on November 22nd, 1963, that is 66,034 inclusive count. So that's how old they were, right? That's what you're doing, how long each of them lived.
Yes.
Yeah, because that's, pretty much like 180 years, 180, how many years is that?
180 years, 9 months, and 18 days.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I figured it's around there, just because I'm used to dealing with number of days and years. I'm not like a math savant or anything. So if you add them all together and you go prior to that date, Great Britain formally declares that it will cease hostilities with the United States of America. So what date is that?
So that's the 4th of February, 1783.
So in 1783.
Yes. So.
Okay. Well, that's pretty.
Ending the Revolutionary War.
Yeah. So it's just another symbol that ties us to the Revolutionary War, where the death of JFK ties us to the death of Abraham Lincoln symbolically. So, well, that's rather interesting. So that's the date. Mm-hmm. So February 4th, 1783. Okay, so it's another one of these little threads that we have. Now, again, people looking at this from the outside who don't understand what we're doing, and we can see that battle, that Revolutionary War parallels the Revolutionary of United Israel, the United Kingdom of Israel, and dividing into the North and South. The United Kingdom splitting between the United States and Great Britain, right? That's part of, we see a parallel there. The Revolutionary War in the United States parallels what happened in 977 BC. And then the Civil War in 742 BC parallels the Civil War in the 1860, right? So that's how we've understood it. And that's all going to give us that Thanksgiving Day prediction, which is going to be part of what FFA uses as the reason for their rash vow. So again, it's a complex picture. A person has to have a lot of pieces of information in their head, or at least on a piece of paper, to put it together. But we can see that this fits with the picture that we have. Okay, and then we looked at this battle that Jonathan is going to have. So there's going to be a sign. Now signs occur. We had signs in the story of Judges. Gideon, he had some signs that he had asked for. Now, Jonathan, the armor bearer, have this sign. And the sign is, what are they going to say to us? So first they're going to go through this passage, through these sharp rocks, Bozez and Senna. We haven't really fully plumb the depth of what that means. But we know that one is situate northward over against Michmash, and the other southward over against Gibeah. So he says, let's go over unto them, right? Because God can save us. But the armor bearer said unto him, do all that is in thine heart, turn thee, behold, I am with thee, according to thy heart. So we haven't really fully understood what the armor bearer is. We do know what an armor bearer carries, armor. But the armor bearer is going to be with Jonathan, right? Whatever you decide, I'm with you. And then Jonathan says, we will pass over unto these men, discover ourselves unto them. So we're going to expose ourselves so that they can see that we're here. And if they say, tarry until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place. But if they say, thus, come up unto us, then we will go up, for the Lord hath delivered them to our hand. And this shall be a sign unto us. Now we know, of course, the word sign there in the Hebrew Strong's number is 226, which is related to 6:22, right? June 22nd, right? Which is a symbol that comes from Millerite history and connected to FFA. So there's a sign here connected to FFA. Now I'm also going to, at that time, create a Facebook page called the FFA Study Group. I don't know if people know about that. I'm not sure exactly. I could probably find out what date I created that Facebook group. But I'm going to create that Facebook group because of what? Because I'm shut out from it. I'm not sure. But anyway, so what would this sign be? We talked a bit about it. And how would we apply this to what happens?
You said when did you create the Facebook page? FFA? When was that?
Well, it's going to be after FFA cuts us out, right? So once I'm blocked.
Oh yeah.
Right. I also do the Unity group as well as a WhatsApp group. But I don't know what. I'm just wondering about the date that I did that.
Yeah, I was wondering that too, the date.
I don't know.
Does it have the date written on the page anywhere? Date created?
Well, they'd probably have,
Somewhere, probably.
Yeah, I'd probably go back and find, when. I don't know how you do it. There should be something where you.
Might be interesting.
Yeah. I'm just not sure if I did it right away or not.
It wasn't long after. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
A couple weeks after.
Well, I don't know. Anyway, but it's not that important right at this point. It's just that, we're talking about FFA, and I'm just saying that we had the Unity group on WhatsApp and the FFA study group that were created because of the fact that, we were shut out from FFA. But yeah, I don't see where I can find the date it was created. No. Oh, yeah. It was created on December 6, 2020.
So you created the very, very day.
Yeah. Yeah. So that group. So, and the reason I'm thinking about this, so the Unity chat started on December 11th, 2020. Okay. So it's going to be 5 days later on notes. So when I look at this sign, the question is, does this relate to my decision to, we'll say, fight against the Philistine garrison that's there in the land of Israel, saying that has to do with the leadership of FFA in some way, or this idea that's in FFA? Because it's not really the leadership. Now, I don't remember asking for a specific sign per se, but there were things connected with what was happening that week that helped in my decision. So first, we're going to have Dan. What's his last name? Van. What's his name? Dan Van. I know it's a Dutch last name. Just can't think of it.
Daniel Vanderhorst.
Vanderhorst. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So he's going to do a presentation on December 5th. And December 5th is, I'm just, because I wrote a paper regarding it as well, dealing with Dan Vanderhorst's, the significance of those 3 days. So there's a 3-day period. There's the Friday. There's going to be I can't remember all of the details now. But anyway, there's going to be the December 5th is already marked as part of a structure. I just can't remember exactly how we did that structure. And those 3 days we parallel to the 3 days in Ezra. So it becomes part of a sign. And the question is, if we were to tarry, if this is what the Philistines are saying, tarry until we come to you, what does that mean as a symbol other than come up unto us? And how would that deal with, so one is passive and one is active, right? Is that how we would look at it? Now, in both of these cases, it was initially called FFA Outcasts. I changed the name, and Jonathan was an outcast. Okay, yeah. So I called it originally FFA Outcasts. You are correct, and I changed the name in 2021. Actually, let me see if I can find that, because it told me that on December 2nd, 2021, I changed it to FFA Study Group. But initially it was the FFA Outcasts on December 6, 2020. Yeah. But we have this passive and this active position of Jonathan. Now, in both cases, he believes that he's going to be delivered, or that the Philistines will be delivered into his hand. But he asks what he should do. That is, he's not just doing whatever he wants. He's not being rash in that sense. He's looking for God's guidance, correct? Because if he's going to stand still, he's still going to have to battle them, right? And he still believes that God will deliver them into his hand. At least I think so. Because if he stays where he is, I mean, if the Philistines come to him, he's still going to have to fight them either way, right?
Right.
But the question is, what is it that we need to do? He's not just doing what he wants. He's allowing God to lead in what is the best decision to make. So he's prudent in that sense. So we have this either active or passive way in which he's going to deal with this situation. Now, I do know prior to this point in time, I mean, I do kind of know what's going on. I mean, I'm not totally oblivious to what's happening, because I've seen these papers. Noel's wife, I can't think of her name, but she's going to write a paper against, symbolic use of numbers. There's going to be an attack upon what I've written, which is, I think Bronwyn writes that. Maybe that's just later in the declaration. But anyway, I know that Bronwyn is opposed to what I'm doing, right? That we shouldn't be looking at any dates at all. So that the idea that, we had dates still in the future, that we should just abandon those dates. But we weren't predicting anything on those dates. We just said that they're symbols, right? So now we know that Dan Vanderhorst he's going to try predicting things. So I wasn't really happy with what he was doing in that sense, right? And I kept telling him, well, you're putting dates in the future. Don't expect anything to happen on those dates. Now, he did make some dates in those past, and we haven't heard from him since. And I think that's why I think he became discouraged, thinking that he could predict things and failed. But, what he was doing wasn't wrong as far as looking at these structures of dates. The problem was when he was predicting what would happen and expecting something to happen, right? That was the mistake, which I tried to be careful with him, and I wasn't wanting to discourage him, but I was pretty clear. You're not going to be able to predict events. We should know that. Now the question here then is that we have Jonathan. We're saying that Jonathan in some way represents me, but more the work that I'm doing at that time. The armor bearer. What do we do with this armor bearer? Still, I'm still puzzled about the armor bearer.
Could he be your channel with God, or your guide, your angel?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm not. I would say it has to do with some aspect of the truth that he's representing. Now, if we add those numbers together in armor bearer, right? So 3627 and 5375. So again, we got those two words. That one's from 3615. Okay, so it's just somebody who lifts the apparatus, right? That's what an armor bearer is. Pretty much, literally, what it's saying. But if you add them together, you get 9002. Now we know that the date that we have December 6, 2020 is the 20th day of the 9th month. So does that number 9002 just relate to those digits of the 20th day of the 9th month?
That could be one application.
Now, if we use it as, 9,000 is actually 25 years of 360 days. I don't know if that has any significance. That is 25 years and 2 days. So 25 and 2, does that relate to the 2520? So that's another symbol that we can,
52,
right?
525, 252.
Yeah. So if we take 9002, it refers to the 20th day of the 9th month, which is that same date, December 6, 2020, is the 20th day of the 9th month, one biblical year prior to the end of the 777 structure. So they picked a very good day to publish that declaration. We also know that in the Mayan long count, the final three digits are 817, all the digits of 187, right? We have the fact that the armor bearer is 902, the strongest numbers added together, which 20th day of the 9th month, plus it's 25 years and 2 days. So that would give us the 2520, right? As a symbol, which already December 6, 2020 gives us 126, which is shorthand for 2520, plus if you multiply it by 20, you get 2520. So we have all of these symbols that continue to point us to this date, right? So we've been pointed to this date many different ways. So I don't think we can argue against that's what's being addressed in this history, this separation that happened in the movement on December 6, 2020. This whole story of Jonathan and his armor bearer, and it's going to be connected to this rash vow, right? So that rash vow is that December 6th date. Okay. And then we have this, these signs, this sign, based on what Jonathan is going to do. So Jonathan is, we'll say, I am seeking to weed out, this error within the movement, right? I'm not totally aware of my conflict with FFA in that way, but there is a spirit or an idea that we say that has to do with the Philistines. Now, the Philistines, initially, we're going to say that relates to Parminder's group, but that still exists within the movement. That is, the spirit, the methodology, the teachings, the ideas that Parminder was teaching continue in the movement, even after December 6th, 2020, right? And the reason I'm going to have the conflict with the American group and the Canadian group, besides my own personal failings, but the issues are going to be really, those are going to be more excuses for them to cut me off, because the real issues are what they're teaching compared to what we should be teaching. So that they are, we'll say the one thing is the conspiracy theories. The way in which they're viewing conspiracy theories is a problem. How they're dealing with people, the irreverence that's occurring, all of these things become part of a clash between what we're doing and what the Canadian and American groups are doing. And so, and we also know that there is an inherent bias that had been developed in 2019 when some of the people from the Canadian group went to Arkansas. They came back with me having a completely different relationship with them. And the only thing that I can do, I can only know it by conjecture, is that some of the things that they heard, and I do know that they did talk to Bronwyn, they did know about what happened with Heidi and I being kicked out. And so that tended to bias them. Some of the people I know specifically, it did bias them towards me and Heidi, because they believed what they were being told about us, even though it wasn't true, right? So, and they never came to me and said, you know, when we were in Arkansas, we heard this about you. You know, can you tell us your side of the story? They just didn't do that. So, so I found out over time from different people that this was happening, that they were talking about what happened. Now, even after Bronwyn and those basically kick us out of the WhatsApp group and cut off communication, you would think that people would then question, well, maybe Bronwyn wasn't in the right. So somehow this same spirit just continues on, right? This, and also the understanding of Parminder, how he was dealing with the lines. And it took us some time to sort out the precious from the vile. So we know that Parminder was teaching a representation of the lines that did not exist in Millerite history. And there's a partial truth underlying it. We talk about the priests and the Levites and the Nethinim, but he had these as separate lines, and then he had another line. I can't remember what he called the other line. So he had basically 4 lines, and we see nothing like that in Millerite history. So people were expecting to see things in these lines and ignoring the basic pattern of the lines that Jeff had laid out. So we've continued to follow the pattern of Millerite history, and the Canadian American group have followed this sort of more haphazard understanding of the lines that we got from Parminder. So that's, you know, a technical aspect of what we inherited from Parminder, which would be the Philistines. But we also have, you know, in this situation, there is, the Philistines also represent an overwhelming force, right? So they have now, and it'll be interesting to see, you know, after all these things are all done and we get to look back at how much we're going to see of this history, but really what has been happening behind the scenes in this movement. Because I really believe that there are many people who have stayed in the movement, you know, after Parminder's group left and even after the split from FFA, that are still actually connected to Parminder's group. that there is an influence there. And we see it not even just like in the Canadian American group, but I see it in many of the other people who claim to be following still Jeff, but actually hold on to lots of the teachings of Parminder as being very significant. There are people who are more what I would call syncretists. That is, they try to say that everyone, me, Parminder, Jeff, we're all correct. Which of course makes no sense because we're quite different in what we believe. You can't say everyone's correct. So they try to mix all of these different teachings, and I've had number of, I call them clashes, with people who have tried to promote Parminder's teachings regarding parable, how we use parables, his parable teaching, which I think is out and out spiritualism, right? Should have had no part in the movement what Parminder was teaching about parables. So hopefully that's helping this kind of bring it more into focus. And any thoughts on this so far? Because we haven't got really to the rash vow yet here. We know that there's going to be the slaughter of 20 men in the midst of this acre of land. So we're taking that as symboling a chiasm. Now it says about 20 men, which is not specific. Now it says about 20, but it doesn't actually say that in Hebrew. I wonder why they put about in there. Yeah, I can't find out why they put about 20 men. That's peculiar. That's in 1 Samuel 14:14. Even the Jewish Publication Society puts about. Is there something that I'm not seeing here? Sorry about that. Sometimes I get a little picky about things. So it's as you can see, I'm looking at these different translations here. So even Young's literal puts about. Yes. So Angela makes a note. 12, 25, 21 was about 20 years after 9/11, right? Yeah. Now the other thing that is, if you take 20 men, that is, if you take the Hebrew numbers for 20 men, this is 6242, and you add 376, you get 6618. Now 6618 is the number of days. If you go from 9/11 and you count to 6618 days, you're going to come to October 25th, 2019, right? So 6618, I think that's the date. October 25th, 2019. So you're going to be 15 days short of November 9th, 2019, right? Because 6,633. So that number, the about 20 men, is about the length of time if we take 20 men as a number from 9/11. So obviously that's not 20 years, but it is about 20 men, if that makes sense to people. Now, really, it's 18 years if you take that number 6618, and it's going to be 18 years and 43 and a half days. So 18 years and 44 days. But we could deal with, about 20 years, maybe. I'm just not sure why it says about, why they do that sometimes. Okay, so I'm just looking more closely. I wonder if it has to do with the kaf at the beginning of the word. That might be why they get the about. Yeah, so that's why. It's got a kaf in the beginning, which can mean about. Literally it means like or as, but it can, so So that's why they put a boat. So there's like 20 men, right? That's how we'd say it in English. In about a half a furrow of a yoke of a field is what Young says. But I don't think that's the best. So the idea is that it's in the middle of this acre of land, which a yoke of oxen might plow. Right. So that's how we take it. So the idea that it's a half acre of land, I don't think is correct. It's just in the midst of an acre. So representing the chiasm. Of course, 14:14 represents that idea as well. Now, what about the next verse? There was a trembling in the host in the field, and among all the people, the garrison and the spoilers, they also trembled, and the earth quaked. So it was a very great trembling. So we got an earthquake symbol, but that is, they are going to believe that everybody's coming out of their hiding place. The watchmen of Saul and Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down. Then said Saul unto the people that were with him, number now and see who is gone from us. And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his very well. So we would take this numbering related to what FFA leadership does in connection with December 6th. Right? So this numbering is figuring out who's not with us, basically. And Saul said unto Ahiah, sometimes called, bring hither the ark of God, for the ark was at that time with the children of Israel. And it came to pass while Saul talked unto the priest, so he is a priest, right? That the noise that was in the host of the Philistines went on and increased. And Saul said unto the priest, withdraw thine hand. And Saul and all the people that were with him assembled themselves, and they came to the battle. And behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great discomfiture. Moreover, the Hebrews that were with the Philistines before that time, which went up with them in the camp from the country round about, even they also turned to be with the Israelites that were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, all the men of Israel which had hid themselves in Mount Ephraim, when they heard that the Philistines fled, even they also followed hard after them in the battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed over unto Bethaven. So there's going to be a lot of symbolism in here. And then we're going to have the rash vow, right? So we can see that this battle is something that's going on prior to the rash vow, but it still all points to this December 6, 2020 date. Okay. Any final thoughts before we close with prayer? We'll come back to this tomorrow. So some very interesting observations today. Okay, let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for the time that we've had to study here this morning, and for all the things that you have shown us. We know, Lord, that we understand the place that you've given us, the responsibilities in connection with this message. And we just pray that we can be faithful, that we can trust in you, in your leading and guiding. And we ask for your continued blessing as we study on our own and as we come together tomorrow. Be with each person, watch over them. May we have angels' care and protection. In Jesus' name, amen.